The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.
What's up, Alex?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
thanks for
perfect.
joining us here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. It's nice to have a chance to finally chat with you, and I've been admiring your work. It's really beautiful, and I feel like it does an excellent job of being able to capture the kind of visionary states that we've all probed in the outer reaches of our consciousness. And you're part of the mission to try to collect those visions and bring them back into the collective consciousness.
Yeah, and build the collective visual encyclopedia together.
Yeah, to be a cartographer of the mind, as some people have said. I like that definition.
It's a great definition.
Cool, man.
Thank
So,
thank you.
yeah, my pleasure. So, we were talking a little bit just a second ago about this painting, but I'm really curious to know what this painting is behind you. If you could tell us a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. I'll try to zoom out a bit here so I can show the piece in full. So basically, I realized that I've done a few self-portraits in like sketches and drawings, but I've never done a self-portrait in painting. So I figured it was time. And then I had a quiet, like, near-death experience. I had a car accident a month ago where I was close of losing my life. But
Wow.
both me and my brother came out like with our, yeah, without any serious accidents. And through that, I kind of channeled this vision of kind of to sum up the medicine work that I've been doing. So in this position, or in this picture, I'm puking, sitting with the bucket, and then with the ayahuasca cup close to my hand. On the other side, I have like the hape or rape pipe, which I've been using quite a lot, which tends to get me into the kind of purging state. By this side, we have the combo frog, and I also have the combo dots applied where I have them on my body as well.
Mm.
And then, like around the whole composition and painting, I've got different teacher plants, different plants that I tend to use or have used in my medicinal practice. So we got the belladonna here, for instance, which is of the poison plant family or nightshade family.
Mm-hmm.
Henbane as well, which is very, very powerful plant, but both of them needs to be used with great care. We got the Salvia divinorum, the digitalis, the foxglove, and then the passion flower here. Some poppies, and these vines are the ayahuasca vines, so the Panastyriopsis caapi. Over on this side, we have some, down here we've got some dried amanita, like fly agaric mushroom caps. And then the peyote, or Lapopora williamsi cacti growing over here. And then the San Pedro and Peruvianus cacti are growing over here with the aloe vera right next to them. The datura plant, which is also the nightshade and poison plant family. The hollyhock. And then up here, we've got two different Brugmansias or angel's plants growing. And down here, we've got the liberty cap as well. So I think I've covered all the plants.
Yeah.
The morning glories here as well.
Wow.
That's all the plants I decided to include in this painting. And all of the plants in the painting I've got personal relationships with. And some of them more than others. And yeah.
So you've worked with all of the plants directly that you are painting in this portrait?
Mm-hmm. Among others, yeah.
So you've worked with Toei, the Datura. How do you use it?
Mostly either, like I sometimes smoke the seeds, or like because I grow them myself. They're beautiful plants. So sometimes I tend to harvest the flowers and the leaves and make different incenses out of them, or maybe eat them in quite small doses and often in more ritualistic settings.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes, like when in an apartment I had a few years ago, I used to go to sleep under the towing plant when it was flowering. Then you could really access it through your dream state,
Hmm.
and that is a quite safe way to use it.
Right. That seems like the safest way. That plant has a reputation of being very dangerous and,
Oh yeah, they
with
are.
stories that it will make you go insane, that people completely disconnect from reality and they become basically possessed by it. And that
Hmm.
when they use it just one time, it basically breaks their mind and they never come back. And so there's like a lot of kind of like warnings, like here be dragons about
Yeah,
that particular plant. And I
yeah,
think they're
they are.
beautiful. And I mean, I think they're amazing. And I remember when I was in the Amazon and I did my own dieta in Peru, how they flower at night in the moonlight in this really kind of beautiful and sort of macabre way. You know, there's something very gothic about the fact that they blossom under the moonlight and then they close up during the day.
It
Um,
really is, and the scent
yeah,
is amazing. They really smell wonderful. Do you have
yeah.
a relationship with those plants?
With these plants, yes, some of them. Ayahuasca certainly, and with the San Pedro and mushrooms and Cambo as well. Salvia I've explored a bit. It's not really my thing, but
Okay.
it's fascinating. Salvia is this. I would say that the states of consciousness that I've experienced on Salvia are the strangest states of consciousness I've ever experienced in my entire life,
Yeah, definitely.
and it is definitely a totally bewildering experience that is like being thrust into absolute chaos without a kind of like anchor. Like the stuff that I was experiencing and what was happening and my perspectives were completely random and just totally weird. That it's just there's no logic to it at all. And it's different. Like if you smoke DMT, you have these really overwhelmingly powerful experiences, but there's always like a higher order of symmetry and complexity that comes through with it. It's like hyper logical in a way. Like it follows the
Yeah,
same patterns of nature and stuff. But when you smoke salvia, it's like it's not organized at all. It's not like there's no
no, it's
cohesion or
full of
pattern
chaos.
to it. It's
Yeah,
just total chaos. Yeah, and so I've not been particularly attracted to it. I think it's interesting, and I think like it's worth exploring. It makes you certainly question a lot of what, reality is because you can,
yeah,
jump through that portal and you end up into some other dimension completely that has a lot of, reality to it when you're in it. So
yeah.
it does certainly provoke questions about consciousness, and it's interesting to be able to explore consciousness through that as a tool. But
That is
in
right.
terms of the actual experience of it, it's a lot more. It's felt a lot more beneficial and pleasant to use other sort of medicines. If I'm interested in having a high octane altered
Mhm.
state experience, I'll probably go for DMT over salvia.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I must say also that I had the experience of doing ketamine IV this last weekend,
Mm.
and that was such a powerful experience getting it directly in. And we had a very beautiful ceremonial setting with a lot
Mm.
of friends around. Um, and that was one of the absolute most potent experiences I've ever had in my life so far.
Absolutely.
And coming back from it, I broke down completely and was like hugged by all my friends and broke down and started crying. I hadn't cried since I was a child, so
Mm.
I could really feel, and still being in that experience, I could feel myself crying from like being a small child into being a teenager and then to finally like landing in myself and just releasing all of that held on
Hmm.
like energy. That was
Alex, I can hear you fine, but people are saying that they're having difficulty hearing you.
okay.
But
See if I can fix that a bit.
maybe there's some headphones or something you can use.
Yeah, the only problem is I
Oh,
forgot my
that's much
headphones.
better. Whatever you just did made it a lot better.
Perfect. See if I can have it stable like that.
Yeah, I relate to that story. First of all, yeah, ketamine is certainly one of the most like high octane psychedelic experiences that you can have, and when taken in a sufficient enough dose, I think it's on the equivalent level of DMT, if not stronger. And I've had very intense psychedelic experiences with it as well. Most people kind of seem to skirt on the edge of it, and a lot of people it's like a actually a negative thing to go into what they call the K hole. But I think that that's really the interesting. That's the only thing that I found to be interesting about it. I think when you take it in a small dose, it kind of makes you feel a little drunk or woozy, and it's not really that interesting at all for me. But if you do have those kinds of experiences that result in ego death, to fall into that portal and to be completely dissolved like Alka-Seltzer evaporating into the cosmic ocean, to where you don't even exist anymore or have any memory of having existing. Like that's a really powerful and intense experience. You're just, plunged into the void, which is how it's felt when I've done large doses of ketamine.
Definitely.
But yeah, and also in terms of like, I remember once, maybe about like 3 or 4 years ago, I guess it was about 4 years ago now, I had a series of rather intense ayahuasca ceremonies, and had a similar kind of thing after my like third ceremony. Just like was like crying and crying, and like cried for basically like 3 days straight, on and off. And I hadn't, at that point, I think I realized I hadn't actually cried in like 7 years or something like that. It's amazing that I think that, um, especially as a man, there is so much kind of like a block around crying. Like it's not really socially acceptable. And so I think that as men, we're taught to repress that urge, and so it gets like built up or stagnant. But it felt absolutely amazing just to like to cry and let it out. And I wasn't really crying for the sake of sadness. I wasn't sad or anything like that. The crying that was coming through from that experience was just a release and an opening. And I was experiencing an overwhelming sense of actually like it was like tears of beauty, really.
Oh yeah,
you know
definitely it is.
it transcended any kind of specific emotional state. It
Yeah,
wasn't sad and it wasn't happy. It was like whatever
just
is
full
beyond
on
both of
release.
those. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was amazing. And I think that that's something that psychedelics often do for people, because I think that one of the reasons why I think that psychedelics are very relevant for our time and our culture
Hmm.
is I think that we are our egos are extra strong. You know what I mean? There might have been other cultures where you don't need psychedelics to have these kinds of experiences, and people would get these kinds of mystical downloads on the natch through
Yeah,
yoga and through fasting and a lot of other things.
yeah, and just
But
being connected to nature and yeah,
absolutely, but the way their kind of ego structures are built is different, and I think that we have enforced the ego, and we've grown and nurtured it till it's become this monster that kind of exists within our culture. And psychedelics then are a necessary medicine to kind of counteract that,
yeah,
to
they're
really
a great
help.
sledgehammer.
Yeah, it's like a sledgehammer. Yeah, so I think that especially emotionally, I think the reason why you can experience something like a powerful release after a powerful emotional release after a strong psychedelic experience is because there's no ego defenses there anymore. And it's the ego defenses that hold us back from being able to experience those emotions. And so it's
Yeah,
kind of like psychedelics are almost like emotional enemas for people sometimes. You know, it's like just to have all of this years and years and years of like backed up stuck emotion, and then you have a high dose psychedelic experience, and like it's like all this emotion comes out. And that's why oftentimes people, I think, are afraid to take psychedelics, is because they know that they have all of this pumped up emotion that they're going to have to feel and that they're going to have to experience, and that that's going to be a really intense thing. But by going through that intensity and by going into those emotions and to actually feeling them so deeply, it seems to have a tremendously beneficial effect, where after that you feel 100 or 1,000 times better and lighter, just by allowing the emotions to move, and that energy is no longer stuck within you. It kind of, it lets the energy flow again and gets things cycling.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, because your work is very reflective of the kind of visionary psychedelic state, and you're obviously portraying that in this painting as well. So what's your inception story as an artist and as a psychedelic artist? Were you creating art before having psychedelic experiences, and has your art always been interlinked with those types of experiences?
Yeah, no, I wasn't. I grew up as a musician, so I was creating art, but not visual art. I was a drummer, primarily a metal drummer.
Cool.
So I grew up
Sweden's a
in,
great place to be a metal drummer.
dude. It's a perfect
A
place.
lot of my favorite metal bands are Swedish, actually.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, high quality. No, so
High
I grew up in
quality.
that realm, and then I was a gymnast as well. So primarily like metal and sports. And then I kind of, both of those realms or both of those paths kind of ended, and yeah, went into depression, and then I had my first psychedelic experience and had a complete transformation into being an artist. So I went from deeply depressed into finding my path as a psychedelic visionary artist through the psychedelic experience. So I really understood the power, like back then, of the life-changing potential that the psychedelics have, and used like in a responsible and in careful setting the extreme benefits that can occur through the experience, because they saved my life and like put me on the path that today makes me sit here in this interview and today makes me live this life. So they
Mm.
got great power, but they also have the power the other way. Like if you're not careful, you can come out with more problems than you went in with.
Yeah. I think kind of like the myth of Icarus is a good example of how psychedelics can be used. It's kind of like, you know, the fire of the, you know, the transcendental object that you can come in contact with through psychedelics is, it's so inspiring, and it can fill an artist or anybody, I guess, with so much like power and so much
Yeah.
inspiration. But there's only so far you can push it, and if you push it too far, if you get too close to the sun, so to speak, then you can burn out, and many people have.
Definitely.
So it's like how I've been asking myself more lately, you know, how does one cultivate those states of consciousness and to access those states of inspiration at will without necessarily needing to ingest something, because
Yeah.
there is a danger that you are treading a thin line by going into these high octane states of consciousness. You can't just be having breakthrough experiences all of the time, without losing some sense of your responsibility to tending your life in physical reality, which is equally as important. So it's a balance that must be maintained, I think. And there have been a lot of blowouts in history with great artists that perhaps tread too deeply into the psychedelic waters without being careful.
Yeah.
For
Without
example,
having a really good grounding and yeah.
yeah, for example, Sid Barrett, you know, he was the founding member of Pink Floyd, a musician that I've always been inspired by. I think his music is amazing and groundbreaking and incredibly psychedelic. you know, and it's probable that he had latent schizophrenia, and it wasn't exactly the psychedelics themselves that made him become psychotic. But I think that the psychedelics didn't help, you know, and that his state of consciousness probably would have been more stable without the exorbitant use of psychedelics that he was participating in. But at the same time, had he not been using an exorbitant amount of psychedelics, we wouldn't have gotten that amazing music. So he's like, there's a lot of these kinds of like martyrs in a way, you know, these artistic martyrs. And I think Jim Morrison is kind of like an artistic martyr in the same way. People that flew too close to the sun and were burnt out as a result, but yet the results of that, of their explorations for being so reckless, gave us some amazing creations.
Yeah, definitely. But going back to the beginning of this thread, what kind of methods and ways do you explore to access those states of consciousness at will, or without the kind of chemical gateways?
I've been having a lot of powerful experiences lately through visualization meditation. You know, so basically, I mean, the main thing that psychedelics stimulate for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, are third eye energy, right? Mm-hmm. So to have closed-eyed visuals, you know, and to feel the kind of like, I'm sure you do, I feel like a legitimate kind of like buzz in my mind and in my third eye, like a physical sensation during these kinds of psychedelic experiences. Like all the energy is congealing through my brain in a certain way, and it feels really good. It feels like a massage for my brain, and I'm sure you experience it the same way. But I've found that you can actually do something that's very similar to it or analogous to it by focusing on conjuring visions in your mind's eye. So you imagine a vision very vividly and focus your full attention on it in a closed-eyed state, and you are consciously conjuring it. So if your mind slips, if you lose it, or if your mind slips into thoughts about other things, you bring yourself back and you're concentrating fully on that until you vividly, right, until you vividly see it in your mind's eye. So you can induce basically closed-eyed visuals doing that without needing to take a psychedelic. And it's not as intense, it's not as strong, but it feels similar. And it's been really effective for me to try to, you know, have these visionary states without necessarily needing to take a psychedelic to have them. So that's something I really want to explore more of and to continue to practice, because I feel like it's like working out the muscle that is your third eye. You know, it's like stimulating it. Yeah, and how cool is that to be able to induce closed-eyed visuals and to have third eye states and experiences at will without necessarily needing to be on a 12-hour roller coaster ride that might go in any direction that you can't control, but just to sit down for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and to have that experience because you want inspiration for a painting, you know, and it's like having a direct line, you know, having the muse on speed dial, you know.
Really. Definitely. I like using here in Sweden because it's fucking cold here during winter time.
Yeah.
So I like exposing myself to like swimming, or really to really expose myself to the cold.
I like it too.
I find to be a really good both for discipline, but also for like really stilling the mind and coming into that really present state and being able to more like in a clear way channel visions or
I really like it too, and I've done some ice baths and things like that, kind of like through the Wim Hof method. But it's so for me that's more about cultivating discipline and presence, but it has less to do with actually inducing visions or having a visionary state kind of experience. But you can use the discipline that you gain from those practices of doing the cold immersion, for example, which teaches you great focus of mind, and it teaches you how to be disciplined and to maintain control over your reactions and things like that. And then you can apply all of those skills that you learn into doing the visioning practices,
Exactly.
so that you can focus and concentrate more deeply and with greater discipline into those states of consciousness to be able to reach them more quickly and to access them more readily. So it's like all these things are different tools that if you train in all these different disciplines, you have this toolbox then that you can access, you know. And for me, that feels a lot more sustainable and stable than necessarily needing to rely on a psychedelic experience. You know, there's a variety of different ways that you can access altered states of consciousness, or to have to gain inspiration that doesn't require you to ingest something, and that you would have access to at any time and any place, you know, for however much time you have. So you don't need to block out a whole day or several days of time, you know, that you take off in order to do it. And then there's integration work and all of that. It's like you can just dive into a 30-minute inner eye visualization experience, and through that technique you can gain these tremendous visions and insights that then you can use to create works of art from as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I
But
find
I'm
breathwork to also be a really, really potent tool to get into more visualization work as well.
Absolutely. Breathwork is amazingly powerful and can be very psychedelic. And also breathwork when combined with fasting, you know, I think that like the natural ways that you can induce altered states of consciousness without relying on psychedelics are breathwork, fasting, sleep deprivation. You know, these are things that, like, if you're in a sleep deprived state, you're already in a little bit of an altered state of consciousness. If you fast for a significant enough period of time, you're already in a bit of an altered state of consciousness. But if you combine all three, to where you're doing breath work after fasting and sleep deprivation, that induces a really intense, powerful psychedelic experience.
Like a sweat lodge or something to it, or sauna.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, that would probably be very powerful. Yeah, there's all these different methods that people for thousands and thousands of years have used to induce altered states of consciousness. You know, body mortification is one of them. Intense states of pain is one. Exhaustion, you know, like the sun dance that they do in Native American tradition. They'll dance for 3 days without sleeping or eating. And by doing that, it does induce a powerful visionary state, a powerful altered state of consciousness that, you know, I'm not sure about this, but it could be linked to some kind of DMT release within the brain, you know. And I would love to speak to a scientist or somebody who actually can verify that or not and knows if that's true or not. But I think it's possible that it could be actually a DMT experience that is released through the body's natural store of DMT that creates those intense transcendental visionary states.
Yeah, yeah, that would be fascinating. No matter, it's those states of consciousness are really, really powerful. And like you said, like exhaustion or fasting, or yeah, inducing trance either by going inwards or like going outwards is really, really powerful.
Yeah. And people have been having these transcendental states of consciousness for as long as humans have existed. And I think that it's almost one of the primary needs that humanity has. Like our body has certain needs. We need, you know, food and water and sex and shelter and sleep and all these different things. And I think that transcendence is one of those essential needs that's as strong of an impulse as all of those other ones. And you see this evidenced by global cultures celebrating the transcendental state in religious traditions and all over the world. There isn't a single culture that doesn't have some form of the transcendental state that is celebrated, you know. So, you know, Christian tradition, or
of them celebrate death as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fascinating.
Yes, I mean, all different cultures have pretty dramatically different relationships to death, I think. But it seems to me that transcendent experiences are something that have found their way in some form of another into every single culture or tradition in the world, and it's what religions basically are pointing at. You know, I think that in their purity, a religion is a way of celebrating and honoring the transcendental state. You know, that's why if you walk into like a Catholic church, for example, they have these remarkable paintings of angels and you know all the gold and it's all geometric and it's pointing at the same sort of realm that you visited on DMT and that you're painting through your art. They may have not used psychedelics to access it, or they might have, it's hard to say, but they certainly had transcendental experiences that are similar and akin to psychedelic states of consciousness that inspired the works of religious art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. But we had a lot more, or as I find it, both as you said in the beginning of the talk, that like our egos are like super reinforced now, and I think that people had a much closer like connection to the deeper states of consciousness, or a lot easier to like to plug up to the visionary states back in the days.
Hmm. Yeah, I think probably at the inception of human history, people were slipping into these kinds of intense experiences more naturally. And I think maybe the ego, its function is a response to that, because maybe that posed a threat to people's survivals. Like if you were just suddenly tripping balls and there was a tiger that wanted to eat you, you know, you were in a vulnerable state. So I think maybe the ego has arisen as a protective mechanism because you can't, because the body cannot survive in an environment where you are at one with everything and you're
Exactly.
you know, boundaryless all the time. You know, it
Yeah.
needs boundaries to be able to regulate its survival. And I think that that's the primary purpose of the ego. Its function is to help the body orient and survive, you know, so that you know that the food that you're putting in your mouth is your mouth and not your friend's mouth, and that it's like your body that you're feeding and stuff like that. Like that's its function, but it's kind of become overgrown.
Yeah.
It's like a garden that hasn't been tended for thousands of years and is
Exactly. Grown
yeah,
chaotic and wild.
yeah, it has all these weeds and vines that have just overtaken everything and you can't even see like what's below it anymore. And yeah, I guess that in their most skillful, if used in their most skillful way, psychedelics are this kind of like ego pruning device that just helps to, you know, cut back, pull up some of the weeds, like trim the grass, stuff like that, so that you can kind of see what's below it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And put some new seeds in the ground. And I've
yeah.
been thinking a lot lately, like one of the things as well is we're so deeply disconnected from or a lot of the natural experiences when we live in this kind of modern society. Like for instance, the simple thing or the thing of just looking at the stars at night, just laying down and just seeing all of those, or having that kind of ineffable experience, because that is like those experiences can be a real trigger to mystical insights as well. And we have really lost like yeah, we have really come quite a far way from the kind of natural existence with nature and with the natural phenomenon that are really astounding. For instance, like thunders as well, and storms, and all of those kind of power displays that nature has,
Mm.
which I
Yeah, I
think
think
would be powerful catalyst as
Absolutely. Yeah, anytime I look up at the night sky and see the stars, it does kind of it helps to put into perspective our existence so that you're not, you realize you're not the center of the universe.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's really important. And it's strange that in cities, because of the light pollution, you can't even see the stars, that you have
No,
to be out
exactly.
in nature. So that is why so many people are so disconnected from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sunsets also are powerful. I think there's something like that. If I'm like, if I'm in a more doing mind, like I'm on some kind of mission and I'm driving around, trying to get to wherever I'm trying to get to do my thing, but there's like a beautiful sunset, like I just have to stop. Like I can't,
Exactly.
it's like I just have to stop and watch the sunset. It's like it feels like a dishonor to God
To
or
just
whatever you want
go
to
on
call
and do
it,
your
to
exactly.
not watch the sunset. But these are things that people have kind of like lost sight of.
Hmm.
Like if you're in a deep city environment, like you can't see the stars. You might not even really be able to experience the sunset.
No, exactly. No, and I really had like psychedelics had to kind of work their way quite hard. Or like I didn't have a kind of active spiritual or any active spiritual experience until psychedelics. They really opened me up to that kind of deeper mystery of reconnecting into nature, of taking up the like yeah the inner work or trying to sort myself out in a deeper way.
Mm.
And most of the people I meet, both either like artists or other people, it's uncommon that I meet people that had like kind of a natural waking up to their like inner spirituality. And most of the people went through the like chemical doorways, and that shows in a way like how little like natural preparation or natural kind of aid we have in this society towards those experiences.
Mm. Yeah, I think that like transcendental and mystical experiences are not really spoken about at all. And so it's something that if anybody growing up in Western culture isn't really, it's just not part of the mythology or the vocabulary of the culture at all. And I would imagine that if you're growing up in Tibet or if you're growing up in India or even here in Bali, it's different because
Yeah,
there's like a mythology around it. It's kind of something that's understood and talked about. So even kids at a young age would be exposed to the ideas of there being these, far out transcendental kinds of states of consciousness. But most people in Western culture are so consumed by petty ideas about what they're going to buy at the mall or like what celebrities are doing or whatever that they don't even,
unfortunately.
it's just something that like people don't even, people most people have not even ever thought about it. I think
Yeah,
that as a visionary artist, you and I, we've contemplated this stuff very deeply. Like we've spent many, 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 many hours thinking about this kind of stuff and experiencing it and exploring it. But for a lot of people in our culture, they haven't even ever considered this stuff. They haven't even thought about these things at all. They don't even know that it exists. They don't know that there is a transcendental realm, and they don't know that there's a doorway into it through these variety of different means. And I think that for a lot of people who are raised in that kind of a culture, that psychedelics lift the veil to reveal this sort of thing that was there all the time that people just aren't aware of. It's like a
yeah,
secret. It is in a way to have a high dose psychedelic experience is to be initiated into a mystery school
hmm,
because you're experiencing a mystery, you know? And it's a true initiation.
it is really.
Yeah, your story is also quite powerful, and I know a lot of people who, I mean, psychedelics had a really deep effect on me in regards to also having a history of depression and helping to heal that very significantly. I had already undergone a bit of a healing journey through yoga and meditation at the point that I first
Yeah.
used psychedelics, but they really did help. And I think that there are many people who struggle with depression that psychedelics have had a tremendous impact on in a positive way, as well as to help ignite your creativity. And this is something that is also something across the board seems to be an experience that people have. Like people that take psychedelics seem more inclined to want to draw or to paint or to sing or to write songs or to do creative acts. And it's not something that has been really studied, and I understand it's because of, in order to get government sponsorship and approval for psychedelic research, it has to be something that the society deems important, that they can directly benefit from, and they don't value art that much. But I think that there's enough kind of anecdotal evidence now to suggest that psychedelics can be a very important catalyst for people's creativity and to actually help people become more creative, to become more empowered as artists, and to help basically relieve certain creative blocks that might exist.
Yeah, and I think with time, like, because we see this collective change in society where we slowly change our views on psychedelic drugs and on drugs in general. And I think as that opens up, like more and more studies are coming in and being done as well. And I think like the connection between psychedelics and creativity is, yeah, somewhat like really obvious as it is, but I think that some really interesting studies will be done in the future as well on it.
Absolutely. Just to let you know, we have about 5 minutes. Um, yeah. What was I going to say about psychedelics and creativity? Well, I think that the culture is shifting, right? So like there's the dominant culture, and in Western culture, I can only assume that in Sweden it's very similar to how it is in the US. I'm sure there's like slight differences, but it doesn't seem to be that different in my eyes. Is more based around material stuff. It's like the whole culture is kind of fixated on material possessions and wealth and kind of status in this particular way, and it's just the fixation is like, even the fixation on sort of like rational thinking and materialist ideas, such as the way science has been used, for example, to only look at phenomenon that occurs within the material world, and to just completely discount the existence of any other things that can't be measured by the instruments that we have, except for our own consciousness. And actually, it is weird that we consider our consciousness and our own brains to be not a sufficient enough instrument to measure things with, and that we need to, invent other objects that we use, and that only if it's picked up by these other objects is it verifiable. Whereas our like brains are probably one of the most complex instruments that exist to be able to uh, to see these things and to be able to test them.
Yeah,
But yeah,
there's
it's like
so many
the
machines that we haven't invented so far for seeing things that we don't know that
that's
there.
the thing. There have been many things that for a long time were considered not to exist because the tools, the instruments didn't exist at the time to be able to
Exactly.
measure them. And I think that, as technology progresses, there could be instruments that are created that could somehow verify the anecdotal evidence that is being reported that, psychedelics can present with the existence of maybe question mark other dimensions, or question mark intelligent non-corporeal entities, and uh,
Exactly.
ideas that seem to be divined or inspired. You know, the concept of inspiration with artists receiving sort of downloads from some kind of source material or some kind of higher order of existence is an idea that has existed forever and has existed for a long time within the Western mind as well. It's something that people know about, that there are kind of like ideas as entities or you know, these sources of inspiration that come from outside of us that artists can tap into, and that the work that is created from those spaces of transcendence is profoundly more powerful. And I think that this is something that, yeah, yeah, and this is something that I think like every artist has known and has talked about. It's just that it's incompatible with the dominant culture. But as the dominant culture shifts, and I think that we are seeing a shift right now, in a way, this conversation is evidence of that. And as we see a shift towards a culture that values transcendental experiences, that values spirituality in a way as we relate to something larger than ourselves, that's what spirituality means to me. That we're going to see, we're going to, I just think that it's not that far off to consider that becoming more of a dominant culture, because it actually it satiates the needs that people have better than the culture that we exist in now. It's obvious that the culture that we exist in now, as it relates to being overly obsessed with material things and ego and status, just, yeah, it doesn't satisfy the needs of the human spirit. Like, people aren't happy. And
exactly. But I find the evidence of like yoga studios and meditation centers and all of that just exploding all over the world, in every culture, pretty much. And I find
absolutely,
that very stunning and beautiful progress of society, and beautiful evidence of the like need and so forth for inner work.
absolutely. And if you talked about being interested in meditation and yoga in the 1980s, people would have looked at you like you're totally crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's so normal. And I think that the same thing could happen with these kind of more far out esoteric traditions like psychedelics, like, you know, ritual and ceremonial magic, all these things that are kind of more on the fringe of our consciousness, at least within our culture. They're not in general, because there's something that have been sort of consistent throughout human cultures for thousands and thousands of years. But you're still a bit fringy if you're really into psychedelics. But I think that, give it like at most 20 years. In 20 years, I don't think it's going to be fringy. I think it's going to be commonplace.
Yeah, exactly, commonplace. Because you can already see like, how DMT and how psilocybin or mushrooms and LSD is such commonplace in the general discussion, and like on Joe Rogan Experience and on other podcasts and so forth, where it's really common to actually have these discussions in the open forum.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a time where we couldn't really even have this conversation without fearing a backlash of intense consequences, you know, social consequences, professional consequences, like people not wanting to work with us because of us talking about this. But now it's like it's become a lot less stigmatized, and I think that it's going to become more or less and less stigmatized and more accepted in the near future.
Definitely. If it continues the way it has, and I think it will. Because it's been a beautiful transformation only like the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think that like humanity, that like the human spirit craves satisfaction and happiness, and it wants, like, humans want to thrive, right? And we see this, like, revolutions occur when people's needs aren't being met. And so I think that, seeing as psychedelics do seem to meet fundamental needs for people, that it's only a matter of time before that revolution occurs, to where that becomes something that people assert their rights to be able to experience, and that it becomes more commonplace. You can't, you can't like keep the lid on Pandora's box
Exactly.
like that long.
One really important thing, like here, at least here in the Western societies, but in the general world as well, is that we really need a good like matriarchs and patriarchs and good guides and teachers and stuff. Because going into these experiences, like I had no one to guide me like the first years I was experimenting with psychedelics, and I did a lot of errors and like a lot of gave myself a lot of wounds and a lot of unnecessary way, like unnecessary paths to tread. So I think that it's really important that the people that are having these experiences and having a lot of like long history with it can really step forward and be good guides and mentors towards the like coming generation experimenting with all these different both molecules and other ways of inner work.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. I completely agree. And I think that you and I are doing it. And I think that anybody who has been brave enough to kind of be outspoken about these experiences, and especially to devote their lives to trying to realize the visions that you've experienced, or to try to communicate in some way the experiences that you've had of these powerful transcendental states of consciousness, that we're doing that. And you are volunteering yourself, maybe inadvertently, as one of those guides and leaders, just by you choosing the path in life that you have chosen. And that is a lot of responsibility, but you seem to be using it wisely.
I try. And yeah, same to you, man. Like you really seem to be doing like great work and really shouldering that responsibility and carrying the world towards a brighter future.
Thanks, man. Yeah, trying to do my part a little bit, doing what feels meaningful for me. And I think that that's all that drives it.
Yeah, and it looks like it's meaningful for others as well. So keep on
I
doing
hope so. Thank you. Awesome, man. Yeah, you keep up the great work too. And thank you so
it.
much
Well,
for this chat today. And
as well. It was
it's
great
really,
finally being able to sit down and talk for the first time.
yeah, it's great to chat with you, man. I really appreciated it. And I look forward to when the circumstances of our lives bring us together so that we can continue these conversations in person.
Yeah, definitely. And until then, take care and good luck with all your work.
Thanks, man. Much love to you. And thanks to everybody who is tuning in.
Yeah, thank you all. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.